Hi there, Steve Kaufman here, sitting in my yard here in Palm Springs, and again, talking about language learning. And I'm going to follow up on my discussion last week about input and about motivation, and I'm going to make some reference to Taoism or Taoism and Zhuangzi and certain sort of aspects of Eastern philosophy and how I feel that it relates to acquiring a skill like a language. So, I mentioned last time that Stephen Krashen had said that motivation is not the way we get people to learn because a majority of children in school are not particularly motivated to learn. And we have to kind of grab them with interesting, compelling content. And of course, that is true. However, I find as a learner that I can vary the interesting, and I need to have that interesting, compelling content. I did an interview, for example, this morning in Russian. Я дал интервью на русском языке. Я думаю, что все было более или менее понятно. I just said that I gave an interview in Russian and everything was fairly well understood between what my Russian counterpart had to say, which I understood entirely, and of what I had to say, all the while aware of my mistakes, but it doesn't matter. So, the point I wanted to make was with the Russian is that my motivation to learn Russian was the desire, and this came up in our discussion, was the desire to read the works of Russian literature in the original. And I was asked, like, why was this a motivation? And I said, well, because the sense of reading these works in the original, A, gives you a sense of achievement and gives you a sense of something special. You're in touch with the original. It's a wonderful feeling. So that was my motivation. Not everyone is motivated that way. But if I look at my Greek, again, motivated to learn about Greek history, about discovering that large part of the history of the world when Greeks were dominant from about at least in the Eastern Mediterranean world, from Pericles, the building of the Acropolis, Alexander the Great, the whole biblical period when Greek was the dominant language. Constantinople, or at least Emperor Constantine, moved the Roman Empire capital to Constantinople. Then we had Byzantium, which in turn influenced the religions and much of the art and so forth of Eastern Europe and Russia and so forth. I mean, it's a major chunk of certainly European history. And so I was motivated to read up about that in Greek. And when I now can read something that was written in ancient Greek, and I at least can make out the sound, even though the language is different, all of that is tremendously motivating. And it's compelling. However, I'm also capable of listening to these mini stories, which are repetitive. They use a lot of the most common vocabulary. The vocabulary repeats in each story. And I can tell from my statistics at Link that I have listened to these stories. My statistics say 50 times, but I listen on my MP3 player without it showing up in my statistics. So it's got to be 100 times each story. I don't listen to them 100 times at a shot. I listen to it once. I go listen to something else, maybe other stories. Maybe I read about the Acropolis or listen to my podcast. Then I come back to these mini stories. And I'm able to do that because it is relatively easy to do. It's compelling. It's repetitive. The person's voice is pleasing. And it's like training for judo or for whatever. It's this repetitive exercise. It's like going to the gym to train. It's not the game. The game is listening to something that's interesting, but it's repetitive. And every time I listen, I discover something that I missed the previous time. And I think actually even in a class situation, kids will do what they're assigned to do. So they will listen to these simple stories to some extent. And to me, it's a little bit like the sort of, call it, like the Taoist traditions of Chinese, literature or philosophy, and which we can see to some extent in how, like some of the, the martial arts, how this constant repetition of basic forms and patterns are repeated and repeated and repeated until they become second nature. And it reminds me, if I remember correctly, the story Zhuangzi told of this butcher who was butchering an ox for the Duke of Wen or whatever it might be. And he explained that he'd just been doing it for so long that the first year it was more difficult, and by the third year he no longer saw the whole ox. He saw where the tendons and where the bones were, and because he had such a natural feel to how to butcher the ox, therefore he didn't need to force it, didn't he need to force the knife. And it's this idea that we learn things through getting used to them, through repetition, not through some theoretical explanation. And I think the sort of repetitive listening, and particularly listening, as well as reading, more simple material blended in with the more compelling content, is an important part of language learning. And now, how much time I spend on compelling content, how much I spend on this sort of repetitive content, it's more a matter of my mood of the moment. And I think that again is important, that we be guided by our interest, because we have to enjoy the process. So it is easy to listen to the simple stories. It's easier to listen to simple stories when I'm exercising, for example. In the car, I'm happier listening to interesting content because I'm able to focus a little better. If I'm doing push-ups, it's better just to have these repetitive stories going in the background. But again, it's something that we need to decide for ourselves. I just want to make the point, and when I say repetitive, it doesn't mean that you should listen to the same story over and over and over again. I get questions often like, should I stay on a bit of content until I have it 100%? No, move on, and you should look forward to when you can come back to that simple story, and the next time you'll pick up something that you didn't get the previous time. So there will still be words that you may have learned and subsequently forgotten. There'll be aspects of the grammar that you may have noticed and subsequently forgotten, and you go back and you listen to the same thing for the 80th time, and you always pick up something new. So I think a regime of a mixture of repetitive listening with the compelling content is important, and it should be interleaved. It's a term I've used before, but it certainly has its role, and it does tie in, and the reason I raise it again is because it does tie into this sense of learning through getting used to something, which is very much a part of the sort of Zen and Taoist tradition of Eastern philosophy. So just wanted to pass that on. I hope that's useful, and I look forward to your comments, and if you like these videos, please subscribe. Bye for now.